All right, we've got another episode of Tailwind. We're joined today by Dan Cubr, who is a Sandler sales trainer with the EAM Consulting Group. Anything else I should have mentioned in that intro, Dan?
No, Austin, you got it all. It's all they need to know.
Oh, right. Keep it simple, straight to the point, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, we're kind of talking a little bit before we started recording, and I mentioned how we're kind of thinking more about the customer journey during the outbound process. And just hoping to pick your brain and see if we could learn a couple things, selfishly for myself, and then also, for anyone listening. So out of curiosity, to kind of set the stage, because you guys inspired this, like how do you use that customer journey and maybe baby steps instead of big leaps to start building credibility with your sales motion?
Yeah, I think it's you want to try to meet your prospect where they're at, right? And everyone's on a little bit of a different journey, depending on how sophisticated the company is, how big, how much bureaucracy, or if they're a solo and entrepreneur or an individual. You got to meet them where they're at. And so I think it's about asking the questions to really try to help figure out where they're at on that journey, and then if we can be a resource, what does that look like?
Hmm.
That can be different things to different people in different organizations, but I think that's such an important part of that discovery process is to figure out, A, can we be a resource? And if so, what can that look like in their world? And how can we be their wingman, so to speak?
It's funny that you say like meet them where they're at, because when I was talking to Tim, he mentioned the same thing, but he was talking about the medium of like some people are going to be more interested in like emails than phone calls or more interested in
Hmm.
networking events. But then
Hmm.
take it even a step further, like you did, and just say like, well, you got to think about where they're at, like emotionally and contextually, on where they want to be met. So it's more than
Hmm.
just did you make a good phone call? It's also meeting them where they are psychologically to some degree.
Correct, because some people might be thinking like, "Oh my God, I'm struggling with this and I can really use help," or they might be of the mindset that, I'm in a good spot. Like, that's cool that you do coaching and training. That's for someone else. That might not be for me.
Yeah.
So it's really important to find out where they're at and like, are they open to having a conversation about how we can be of help and maybe how we can help them elevate their business. And sometimes, the whole thing is to get to the truth, right? And sometimes it's a no, it's not the right time, and that's okay. Other times it might be, yeah, tell me more. Let's discuss further. Or, hey, I'm really struggling with this. It's, serendipitous that we're talking right now. This is great that, we're having this conversation because I really could maybe potentially use someone like you in my life.
Yeah. It was always great if somebody had just been Googling sales training or like was just like sitting in the pain of that and you call them at the perfect time. But then there's everyone else who's still ICP and probably still could use it. But how do you
Mhm.
navigate when it's not super obvious, like that they need
Yeah.
it?
Well, I mean, I joke and, I jokingly say this, but I think there's a truth to it is that, I sell an intangible service that people never think they need. No one ever wakes up in the morning and says, "Oh, I think I'm going to look for some sales training today." Doesn't
Yeah.
happen. And so oftentimes people are confused about what we do. What do you? Oh, are you a life coach? No, I'm not a life coach. Oh, you must do SEO and search engine optimization. No, I don't do that either. And so oftentimes it's very hard to distinguish because, it is kind of that niche thing. People aren't really maybe understanding what a sales coach is. And so, when you think about sales coaching, leadership development, customer service training, some of the, the pillars of service that we offer, it's helping them really understand how we can be applicable. And so for me, it's asking some questions about their world, and then I can say, well, here's how we've helped maybe similar companies to yours, or similar industries, or maybe
Mhm.
an entrepreneur who is on that, similar stage of a journey that you're on. Here's where we were able to help out. So, kind of giving them a third party story to help them understand and make that correlation to where they could say, oh, wow, yeah, this makes sense. Maybe we should talk. Or, nope, don't think that's the right thing I'm looking for. So,
Yeah.
that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, kind of like find like identifying the pain, even though they may not understand the solution that needs to go with it, essentially. Yeah.
Correct, right? You got to understand if there's pain. Pain's an emotional, compelling reason to make a change.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
they don't have real pain, okay, then again, we might not be the right fit. But if there is some real contextual pain, then we can dive a little bit deeper there, and I can understand, what their pains are, what their challenges are, and that can open the door for hopefully a healthy conversation to maybe understand and position how we could help them. Um, even alleviate some of that pain.
Yeah. So you really never have anyone that's like, oh, I woke up and know that pain.
Not typically. I
Okay.
think in the years I've been doing this, maybe once, but very few and far between. And that's where I think it's important because when people think of sales, unfortunately, a lot of negative, nasty connotations, right? They're thinking of the old school, pushy, press hard,
Mhm.
three copies, used car, stigma. And I'm a big believer you can't sell anything. You can't convince anyone that they want something. You've got to lead them down this path of guided discovery and help them understand that they need it or want it for themselves. Um, that's where the magic happens in helping them understand that maybe they do have a challenge or a pain that they've just been living with that they're maybe tired of living with. And they do want to make a change and they want to have a concerted effort, right? You could, like the person, I'll use the analogy of the person that, hey, I want to get in better shape or I want to lose weight. And they've continued to try to do it on their own. And they've never been able to, whatever, stick to a workout regimen or stick to, a healthier diet and things of that nature. And they finally say, okay, I'm sick of going it alone. Let me hire a personal trainer or let me hire a fitness coach or something. And they've got someone who can hold them accountable and maybe show them new ways to do things and ways to work out and ways to eat and all these things. And all of a sudden they start to see the results they want.
Yeah.
And so I kind of liken to that. Sometimes we can be that resource that people don't think they need until maybe they realize that, I can't figure this out on my own, and that's okay. It doesn't make you a failure. It doesn't make you weak. The best performers in the world in business and sports, they've got coaches, they've got trainers, they've got people that assist them and help them hold them accountable. And so, that's kind of like what we can try to do for them. And so that's where that often, evolves.
I had a failed startup and we failed because we couldn't sell.
Hmm.
So I went and got a job at a sales consulting company and like was
Hmm.
like beyond pure proactive and being like, there's something I'm completely missing here and I gotta go figure something out. And the big thing that was missing from that consulting company was the outbound stuff. So for me,
Mm.
like just working with you guys and like, the no pressure prospecting has been game changer. I'm still getting comfortable, but I mean, I was never going to figure that out on my own. It was just
Hmm.
like I just know that that wasn't going to happen.
Hmm.
And like so to your point on like the coaching and everything, like a couple of the big takeaways for me through like the training at this point is um like the mindset stuff, the behavior, just holding yourself accountable, reconfiguring how I'm thinking about that stuff in my brain when I'm reaching out to somebody on a cold call, like just reconfiguring my perception on how I'm meeting that person in their world and like
Hmm.
little quick pattern interrupts, asking for time, doing upfront contracts. Like that was stuff that I was never gonna figure out. But
Hmm.
having a coach definitely did that. And so it's funny to think that like, I don't know. I guess maybe I just got lucky in identifying that our startup original front one didn't work because we couldn't sell. And so we were
Hmm.
like, all right, that we got lucky in the analysis. Maybe we just stumbled over it or something.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's cool.
Well,
So
I think kudos to you. I mean, for doing the post-mortem and saying, "Hey, where did we go wrong, and where did we maybe misstep?" Because oftentimes the bravado, the ego, that gets in the way of like, "Oh, it wasn't our fault. Hey, the
yeah,
clients weren't ready for us. We did everything right. No, you guys were humble enough to be like, okay, we couldn't figure out that sales piece, and then you said, okay, I'm going to do something proactive and let me go get a job." In sales consulting, let me get better at this weakness of mine because a lot of people don't want to admit their weaknesses. So kudos to you guys for being willing to do that. So that if you do another startup, you're not going to have the
yeah.
same result. So that's awesome.
Yeah, when you go broke, you really get humbled pretty good, pretty good.
It's
But
yeah, it's a motivator, right?
yeah, it really makes you look in the mirror and make it, all right, I don't want to do that again. So
Hmm.
how do we navigate it and make sure it doesn't happen?
Hmm.
So then when we talk about like meeting people where they're at and being like contextually there, like what are some of the activities you do that like obviously like you're having a conversation to start understanding where they're at.
Hmm.
Do you like custom make what you're gonna do for your plan for the next steps, or do you kind of have like rough heuristics? Like generally I find that like solo entrepreneurs, here are like the three things that help them, build the trust and like take them down the line. Like how does that look in your world when you're doing it?
It varies a little bit, right? Because you've got to read the room, you got to understand. I mean, you have a kind of a framework of what you think that maybe conversation is going to go to, but you can't fall in the trap of assuming you know what's going to happen because everyone's
Mhm.
situation is different. And so I think it's, maybe having an idea, but then asking the right questions, asking tough questions, and really listening to
Yeah.
what's going on in that person's world or in that company's world, and then seeing how you can make a recommendation of how you might be able to help. That's where I think a lot of salespeople maybe fall, is that they want to figure out the solution very quickly. And I've heard this before, I've seen this before. This is how we fix it. And again, you might have some preconceived motion, notions in your mind, and that's okay. But you can't fall into that trap, right? You really have to go in there with an open mind and ask some tough questions and really listen, and then probably ask them more questions and go a couple layers deeper to truly understand what's going on, because that's the only way you're going to ever be able to determine if you can make a real impact to help that person that's sitting in front of you.
So like for somebody newer that gets into those conversations and, you know, is still learning to not fall into the trap, like what's
hmm
practical advice on like things that you can do as an individual to stop yourself from falling into the trap?
Yeah, I think I like to go into every like meeting like that with a pre-call plan, right?
Mhm.
I'm writing down. I'm an old school guy. I love to write things down on pen and paper. You can use computer if you're doing that, but write down a list of questions that I want to ask and make sure I cover, because as you get through the conversation, that conversation can meander and go in different things, and you might miss a pertinent question you wanted to ask because you're just lost in the moment. So, having a list of questions that you want to ask, maybe thinking about what are some questions they might ask you so that you can be ready to answer those, and so you're not in that deer in headlights, caught in the moment type thing.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you just want to have a productive, honest, transparent conversation. In order to do that, I don't think you can wing it, right? You got to do some pre-work and give yourself some guardrails or some guideposts, and then as you get into that conversation, again, take it where it needs to go, but also making sure that you're staying within your framework that you've established for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, like as a rough rule of thumb, could it be something like write out your questions and before you start doing any like diagnosis or like recommendations or like, hey, here's how we could potentially help, guarantee you've gotten through all your questions so that you can then speak from a more full perspective.
Yeah, I think, and you mentioned, the term upfront contract, which is a, part of the,
Yeah.
something, a concept that we teach in the Sandler world, but, kind of setting the stage when you start that conversation, like, hey, here's what we're here to talk about. I want to understand, from you, Mr. or Mrs. Prospect, what's on your mind? What are things that you want to cover today? Here's, from my point of view, here's some things I want to maybe ask you some questions or some things I want to dive into. And then at the end of this conversation, we'll have a better understanding if it's worthy of a further conversation and diving deeper, or we might quickly establish that there's probably not a good fit here, and either one of those answers is okay. But just setting the stage to where hopefully it's a relaxed conversation, and
Mhm.
again, understanding that, you know, what does each side want to take out of this, so that both sides are getting their needs met during that call or that conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So like just being able to focus on, what your controllable behavior is, like so beforehand being prepared is gonna reduce the likelihood that you fall into a trap. And just the
hmm
more you do prepare and the more you get the reps in, the better you'll get
hmm
at that.
Yeah, I mean, with anything, repetition is huge. I mean, when you're doing something newer that you're not used to doing, yeah, you're going to fall on your face, right? And there's an old saying, don't practice until you get it right. Practice until you can't get it wrong, right? And so making sure that you're doing those reps, understanding that you're going to mess up at times. That we're all going to. It doesn't matter, how long you've been doing something. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have missteps. You're going to screw up, but the goal is to limit those, right? And just have a good plan and have consistency. Because if you have consistency in that, you have a better chance for more consistent outcomes. Whereas people who are going to go in and kind of wing it during a conversation, who knows where it's going to go? And sometimes you might get lucky and you might have a fruitful conversation and get a client or a deal out of it. But I'd say probably more oftentimes than not, if you're just winging it, you're going to have the roller coaster of results. And so that's why it's important to really think about and prepare in advance, and then try to be disciplined to ask questions and really listen during that conversation versus wanting to just talk about solutions and talk about how you can solve things because again, you probably are way far away from understanding what really needs to be done to really help that person or that company.
Yeah, yeah. So you talked about the very structured pre-call planner approach. Do you have like
Hmm.
a structured post-mortem after a meeting that you go through?
Postmortem as if it didn't work, or just a post like regardless of if it's a want to continue the conversation or we don't want to continue.
Yeah, I mean, just in a situation where like, do you do something where like you get done with the meeting and then do you spend like 5 minutes just being like, okay, what did I do well, what I didn't, or like, do you always
Yeah,
have certain situations?
yeah. I want to understand. I want to take a look and kind of do, yeah, kind of a recap and a postmortem and figure out like where did I hit the points I wanted to hit? If I go in with kind of some intentions of making sure that, hey, I get these questions answered, or I want to understand this, did I accomplish those things or did I fall short? Did I forget to ask these questions that I wrote down? Or did I walk away from that conversation and maybe we have another meeting set up, but I'm still unsure of what this person's challenges or pain. So, yeah, I think it's important to kind of look at that because if there is going to be another meeting and I still maybe don't know information I need, then I got to make sure I'm getting some of those questions or get that clarity, in that next call. But if let's say, we've established that it's just not a good fit, do that postmortem. Where did it go wrong, right? What did I maybe do or not do? Maybe it was just not a good fit, and that's okay. But maybe there was a fit, and I bobbled it and I fumbled the ball at the 5 yard line. Who knows? But I think it's important to take an honest look and give yourself honest, feedback on what you could have done differently or better.
So like even as simple as just saying like, all right, I have my pre-call planner. I went through the conversation. Let me just go look at the pre-call planner and see how much I stuck to plan would be like a good
Hmm. Yeah,
starting
that'd
point.
be a great starting point, right? Like, see, did you hit the things that you wanted? Maybe there's some,
Yeah.
hey, I had three questions I wanted to make sure I asked them. Did you ask all three? And did you feel like you got the answers you wanted? Because sometimes you'll ask a question and maybe you're not getting the answer you want. Maybe that's happening here with you and me. You never know, right? And
No, I'm getting
that
all the answers.
that happens, right? And sometimes you can be polite and say, "Well, I don't want to ask, I don't want to pry," or you can say, "Okay, I'm sure I'm not sure I'm following, and I need some more clarity." You maybe have to ask that question in a different way, or you got to, ask an ancillary question. So I think it's important to do that, and then like, yeah, do a little like checklist. Hey, I wanted to ask three questions and get the clarity on this. Boom, I got those three pieces. I feel good about that. Or hey, I had these three questions. I only got one of them answered. I only asked two of them, and one they didn't really answer. They pivoted, and the other one I didn't even get to. Okay, well, you know, did you really accomplish what you set out to do? Maybe not. Okay, well, if that's important to you, then how do we set yourself up to have more success the next time you have a conversation and making sure you're getting the information that you want?
Yeah. So when you're going into it on like a cold call, I guess you'd
Hmm.
still be wanting to have your pre-call plan for that cold call too, right? It's going to be less direct because you're not going to, if you're having a second or third conversation with somebody, you've been learning, you can be very precise.
Hmm.
But when you're going in and you get past that 30-second commercial, and now all of a sudden it's like, okay, I know the things I want to try to hit, generally speaking, but it's going to be super broad.
Hmm.
Um, and then you just like be able to like narrow that down. So do you like how do you handle like the variety of directions during a call that you could potentially go? Like are you just like here are like kind of the three funnels that we might go down as we're talking about this conversation, or is it I just always try to get these three data points because it will steer me at some point.
Yeah, if you're talking about a cold call specifically, I mean, you're reaching out, they're not expecting you. You want to make sure that you're doing like a pattern interrupt, like you'd mentioned earlier, right? You're trying to shock their systems. That hopefully they'll give you 30 seconds to explain
Yeah.
why you're calling and give a little piece of value as to why it might make sense for them to speak with you. And from that, you're gonna either hear like, nope, we're all good, no thanks. Maybe some more colorful verbiage associated with that, but maybe they'll be nice. Or they might be saying, yeah, that's kind of a problem, but maybe it's not the most pressing problem that we have. Or the third one might be like, yeah, that's interesting that you called about that because we're really experiencing that. So those are typically the kind of the three paths it can go down. And you have to be okay with any of those paths, right? If they hang up and say no thanks, or hey, not now, try me again in 6 months, or yeah, let's talk. But I think the goal of that cold call is, and I think this is where sometimes people make the mistake, they're trying to get too much out of that, right? What you're
Hmm.
trying to do is reach out and say, hey, here's who I help. Here are the type of problems I solve. Are any of these relevant in your world? And if they are, okay, great. Let's maybe find some additional time. I know I've caught you out of the blue here. Let's find some time over the next week or two. We can sit down and talk a little further and see if I can be a resource. And I want to understand your situation a little bit more. That really should be the goal of that cold call. To either figure out, is there interest in talking further? Is there some relevancy? If there is, cool, let's find some time. If there isn't, it's not a relevant problem or there's no interest. Okay, boom. Now I know that, that they're not a fit right now, and that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, what I'm working on my end is that we had just like we have a software solution that we were trying to sell, but now we've been kind of doing postmortems and looking at what's happening. And, part of our discovery process has been providing a ton of value,
Hmm.
of helping people really uncover what their prospecting looks like, what the landscape is, what are some creative ways to identify individuals. And then you get far enough along, and all of a sudden we've just done a ton of free consulting, which is not a great business strategy.
Hmm.
So we're like, well, if people really are interested in this part of it, why don't we also offer that as a service to say, look, we can do like a deep analysis and provide a report back, which might say you don't need something that helps with cold calling. You just need to go to these networking events and that'll
Hmm.
crush it. And
Hmm.
here's your plan. So as having like a cold call outreach when all right, I'm gonna hit my 30-second commercial, talk about how we help with, improving prospecting, so on and so forth. Um, like, would you advise, like, how would you approach like structuring it? Because like my brain's going to just try to get to like a 15-minute conversation schedule that's not a cold call, and then
Hmm.
kind of do it in like a linear fashion of I'm just going to hit the questions around how well do they understand their ICP, where to meet them, how to, actualize it, put it in a tactical application, and then just kind of go down the list. Or would you think of it more of like a bifurcation? I mean, how would you
Yeah.
go about structuring that process?
Well, I think it's interesting what you said because I think what you said is kind of almost like an example of meeting them where they're at, right? Because you kind of maybe were doing, all this, giving them all this information, doing this free consulting because you had a vision for them in terms of what they needed,
Yeah,
right? And then as you've had some of these conversations, you realize that maybe they just want this like more simpler analysis, right? It's not
yeah,
something with all the bells and whistles. It's maybe something a little more simpler, and that might be the good starting point.
yeah,
And so I think that's a great example of you finding out, where your prospects are and meeting them where they're at. So I think, to answer your question, um, just kind of having the ability to kind of say, hey, here's a couple different paths how this could go, this
mhm,
conversation, and then you got to read and react. Sometimes you got to zig and zag, but
yeah,
read and react accordingly. Have your questions, but just being able to have the be cognizant enough and just have the emotional intelligence to take that conversation where it needs to go. It may not always go as planned or quote unquote scripted, and that's
yeah.
okay. But just really being able to kind of read the tea leaves and understand, and then take it where it needs to go. And I think that's a great example of it.
Yeah. I mean, so would it be too on the nose just to be like, hey, this is what we help with, but we solve in a couple different ways, and I can't really tell you how we could solve it best for you unless we have a longer conversation, and then we can go from
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Like, hey, here are some of the challenges that my clients, have. Are
yeah,
these relevant in your world? Because if so, I'd like to learn a little bit more about how they show up. I can't tell you exactly how we solve it or if we can solve it, but I think it's, if you're cool with it, let's find some time. If it's important enough to you, let's find some time where we can have a deeper conversation. And then from there, we can determine if it makes sense to dive deeper or, we part as friends.
yeah. I mean, I think that just makes it a lot simpler to manage in my brain when I'm trying to do everything else around a cold call that I'm still becoming comfortable with, but just being like, hey, let's not try to solve this whole thing on the first call. Let's solve the idea
Correct.
that it's worth a 15-minute conversation. Then I can kind of say, hey, based on what I'm hearing, and this goes way back to your first thing, which was, here's a third party example. Here's how we helped other people in the past, using that as a way to then kind of start helping, both parties involved say what
Hmm.
is the right path forward on that.
Yeah, so people in cold call, I mean, we there's a lot of head trash that we have, right? We're worried
Oh,
about the people that have hung up on us and have, said colorful 4 and 5 letter words to us and things of that nature. And so there's always like, I don't want to, make some more calls and interrupt people or things of that nature. But really, in its simplest form, when you're calling and you're prospecting in any way, calling, emailing, social media, networking, whatever, it's a sorting exercise, right? You're just trying to
Yeah.
figure out, is this person a potential fit for what I do, right? And it might be a heck no, that's okay. Might be a maybe, different bucket, might be a yes, I'm very interested, right? And so it's a sorting exercise, but being able to kind of go with that mindset, and it's easier said than done, but can you emotionally detach from the outcome, whatever it is, yes, no, or maybe, and being okay with whatever result it is, but then accepting for what it is and being able to move on, whether it's nope, no thank you, appreciate the 30 seconds you gave me today, or maybe it's going to evolve into a different conversation. But again, not trying to boil the ocean in that first call, right? It's just to really
Yeah.
just be that starting step.
Yeah. I think I find myself trying to boil the ocean too often. I just need to start being like, my goal is to get to a 15-minute conversation when I'm not interrupting their day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's tough. And I mean, and the thing with prospecting and cold calling, it's difficult because a lot of times you're doing a lot of research to figure out who you're going to call in the first place and the person, the company. How does your product or service maybe have some relevance in their world, or how could it be applicable? And
Yeah.
there's all these other things that you got to think about. And then you got to think about what you're going to say if they answer, and are they going to be a nice person? Are they going to be, grouchy, whatever? There's all these different things. And I mean, that's one thing that, I love about our partnership working with you guys. You take a lot of that front part out of it, right? I don't have to do any research necessarily. We're giving you, hey, here's our ideal clients. Here's who I'm really seeing a lot of, value in providing to these types of businesses or clients. And you guys do your magic and find us great people to talk to. And then I can just go ahead and kind of do my pre-call plan, knowing that I've got 20 people that I can reach out to today because, you and your team have provided that, and it makes my job a heck of a lot easier. So, there's just different ways that you can get that get assistance to make that prospecting or that calling a little bit easier, right?
Yeah. All right, Dan, we had an upfront contract and we've gone 2 minutes over that upfront contract. Any final parting words, anything that like as we were talking, you're like, hey, I'd love to make this point before we sign off?
I think, yeah, two quick things, and I appreciate the time
Yeah.
today and the conversation. This has been good. I think two things, right? When you're thinking about um, prospecting, in general, um, most salespeople, that's their number one bugaboo. They hate it, they dislike it. If they say
Yeah.
they don't, they're probably lying. I think it's really important to um, understand that that's a necessary evil, right? You've got to put yourself out there. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's not always going to be fun, and but you got to have the discipline to just execute on it and make sure you've got like weekly, monthly goals in terms of your prospecting activities and figuring out what those are. Is it networking? Is it calling past clients for introductions? Is it email, social media, LinkedIn, whatever? I think the other thing too is how can you make it easier, right? How can you find services like yours or other things that you can do to make the prospecting part of the job a little bit easier and a little more enjoyable. So those are two things that I would really stress and hit home because then if things are a little bit easier for us, we're going to be more inclined to do them and do them well. So,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
makes sense. All right. Well, appreciate the time, Dan. I'm sure we'll keep
yeah,
talking.
yeah, love it. Thanks again, Austin. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. See ya.